The law office in downtown San Jose smelled like old leather and broken promises. I sat rigidly in the uncomfortable chair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, still wearing the black dress from Henry's funeral 3 days earlier. The fabric felt heavy against my skin, a constant reminder of the weight of grief that had settled over my entire world like a suffocating blanket. Across from me, my son David shifted nervously in his seat while his wife Jessica examined her perfectly manicured nails with the kind of theatrical boredom that made my chest tighten with a familiar anxiety. The March rain drummed relentlessly against the tall windows, each drop echoing the hollow emptiness that had taken permanent residence in my heart since Henry drew his last labored breath in the hospital room where we'd said our final goodbye. Attorney Michael Rodriguez, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying temples, cleared his throat with practiced authority and began reading Henry's will in that carefully modulated monotone voice that lawyers seem to perfect during their first year of law school. The formal legal language felt cold and impersonal, reducing 50 years of marriage and shared dreams to a series of property transfers and financial allocations. "To my beloved wife, Margaret Chen," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the tension-filled room. "I leave the residential property located at 847 Berryessa Road in East San Jose, California, including all structures, improvements, and appurtenant rights." Before he could finish the sentence completely, Jessica let out an exaggerated sigh that sliced through the room's solemnity like a knife through silk. The sound was deliberately theatrical, designed to express her disapproval and impatience with the entire proceeding. "Oh, for crying out loud," she said with obvious irritation, rolling her perfectly made-up eyes with dramatic flair. "Maggie, I ran those neighborhood crime statistics through our Tesla Analytics platform last week. That specific zip code has 2.3 times higher property crime rates than Fremont, and the trend is definitely getting worse." The words hit me like ice water thrown in my face. Jessica had grown up desperately poor in LA's overcrowded Chinatown, the youngest daughter of immigrants who owned a struggling laundromat where she'd spent her childhood folding other people's clothes and watching her parents bow and scrape to customers who looked down on them. I knew her shame intimately, understood her desperate climb up Silicon Valley's unforgiving social ladder, recognized her frantic need to distance herself from anything that reminded her of poverty or powerlessness. She'd changed her name from Jinghua to Jessica during high school, methodically erasing every trace of her heritage like it was an embarrassing software bug that needed to be patched out of her personal operating system. Meeting David in college had been her salvation. His family represented the stable, respectable middle-class life she'd dreamed about since childhood, the security and social standing she'd craved with desperate intensity. But understanding her psychological wounds didn't make her calculated cruelty any easier to bear in this moment of raw grief. "We simply cannot have the children visiting there regularly," she continued, her voice dripping with manufactured maternal concern. "What would their friends' parents think when they hear about the neighborhood? What would the other families at Castilleja say when Emma mentions visiting Grandma in East San Jose?" David remained completely silent, his eyes fixed steadfastly on his hands, while his phone buzzed incessantly with Slack notifications from Meta's always active engineering teams. This was my son, the boy I'd rocked to sleep during thunderstorms when he was small. The child I'd worked double shifts at the public library to support after we immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but hope and determination. The young man I'd celebrated when he graduated from Stanford with honors, when he landed his dream job in Silicon Valley, when he married the woman he claimed to love more than anything. Now he couldn't even meet my eyes while his wife systematically dissected my future like it was some failed startup that needed to be shut down for optimal resource allocation. Mr. Rodriguez continued reading with professional determination, his voice growing slightly quieter, as if he sensed the family drama unfolding in his conference room. "The main residence located at 442 University Avenue in Palo Alto. along with investment accounts totaling approximately $400,000, and all remaining liquid assets are to be divided equally between David Chen and Jessica Wong Chen. Jessica immediately perked up with obvious interest, sitting straighter in her chair and finally putting away her phone to pay attention to the proceedings. "Now we're talking about something actually worth discussing," she said with unmistakable satisfaction, as if the previous hour of legal formalities had been an annoying waste of her valuable time. I watched in stunned silence as they discussed my future, like I wasn't even present in the room, like I was some piece of outdated equipment whose disposal needed to be managed efficiently. The house where I'd lived for 37 years, where I'd raised David with unconditional love and countless sacrifices, where I'd nursed Henry through his final illness with tender devotion, it was all being carved up between people who had somehow become strangers to me. When the formal reading finally concluded, Jessica stood up with theatrical precision and smoothed her designer skirt with satisfaction. "Well, Maggie," she said, deliberately switching to rapid Mandarin to exclude me from the conversation she knew perfectly well that I only spoke Cantonese from my childhood in Hong Kong's cramped tenements. Then, returning to English with a smile as sharp as broken glass. "I guess that settles everything quite neatly. You really need to face reality about your situation here." She pulled out her latest iPhone and began showing me screenshots of real estate listings she'd obviously researched in advance. "That neighborhood is completely finished. Rising crime rates, crumbling infrastructure, no investment potential whatsoever. We've already researched several excellent senior living communities in Fremont, much safer neighborhoods, better security, people more compatible with your background and lifestyle." The phrase, "compatible with your background," hung in the air like toxic smoke. I thought desperately of Henry's voice just weeks before he died, when his mind was still clear and his love was still my anchor. "Promise me something, Maggie. Promise you'll never let them treat you like you're invisible, like you don't matter anymore." But here I was, disappearing as efficiently as an obsolete computer program being deleted from a hard drive to make room for newer, more useful software. "I understand your concerns," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the persistent rain. I gathered my worn leather purse with trembling hands and stood on unsteady legs that suddenly felt much older than my 72 years. "I'll pack my belongings and make arrangements to move." Jessica's smile turned triumphant, like a predator that had successfully cornered its prey. "That's very wise, Maggie. And don't forget to take all those old family photos and knickknacks with you. We're planning a complete redesign anyway, something more contemporary and streamlined." Old photos and knickknacks, 50 years of carefully preserved memories, birthday parties and Christmas mornings and graduation celebrations, reduced to clutter that didn't fit their minimalist aesthetic vision. David finally looked up from his phone, and for just a moment I saw a flicker of the boy I'd raised before Silicon Valley had replaced his heart with performance metrics. "Mom, you know I love you deeply, but Jessica does have valid points about market conditions and safety concerns. We just want what's best for your long-term well-being." I wanted to shake him until he remembered who he used to be, before corporate culture had taught him to optimize every human relationship for maximum efficiency. Instead, I touched my wedding ring. Henry's promise that I'd never be alone, and thought desperately, Henry would know exactly what to do in this situation. Without him, I don't even know who I am anymore. "I raised you both to be better than this," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake of emotions threatening to destroy my composure. "But I suppose I'll have to figure out who I need to become now that everything has changed." The drive to pack my belongings passed in a blur of tears and surreal disbelief. David didn't offer to help with the move. He claimed he had important meetings at Mita that couldn't be rescheduled. He didn't even come to see me off or offer any words of comfort or encouragement. When I finally pulled away from the Palo Alto house with my old Honda Civic loaded with boxes and suitcases, I glimpsed Jessica watching from the expansive living room window, her expression satisfied and relieved, like she'd finally exterminated a persistent pest that had been contaminating her perfect domestic environment. The house on Berryessa Road sat 40 miles east of Palo Alto, in a part of San Jose that Silicon Valley's elite preferred to pretend didn't exist. As I pulled into the cracked concrete driveway, fighting back waves of panic and despair, the full weight of my new reality crashed down on me like a physical blow. This 1952 post-war suburban home, with its weathered stucco walls and overgrown front garden that Henry had always promised to landscape properly, was now my entire world. Not by choice, not through careful planning or excited anticipation, but by the brutal mathematics of family politics where love could be calculated and distributed like stock options in a corporate restructuring. The house key was exactly where Henry had always kept it, tucked under the loose board on the front porch steps, a hiding place that had seemed quaint and charming when we were younger, but now felt like a symbol of simpler times that would never return. Inside, everything smelled like accumulated memories and undisturbed dust, like a museum dedicated to a life that had been lived fully but was now suspended in amber. Henry's reading glasses still sat on the kitchen table where he'd left them after breakfast on that final morning before the ambulance came. His side of our bed still bore the deep indentation of his body, and I couldn't bring myself to smooth out the wrinkles in the sheets. In the backyard garden that had been his pride and joy, his carefully organized tools remained in the precise order he'd maintained for decades, waiting patiently for hands that would never return to use them. That first night alone in the house, I sat in Henry's old recliner, the brown leather one he'd refused to replace despite my suggestions about updating our furniture, and finally allowed myself to truly grieve. Not the quiet, dignified tears I'd shed at the funeral while conscious of everyone watching, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very core of my being, from places I didn't even know existed. I wasn't just mourning Henry's death anymore. I was mourning the complete destruction of my illusions about family, about unconditional love, about the security I'd thought I'd built through 50 years of marriage and sacrifice and devotion to people who had apparently been keeping score the entire time. At 3 a.m, when grief gave way to paralyzing panic, I found myself staring at the business card that real estate investor Kevin Park had left on my doorstep the day before. His offer seemed impossibly generous, $850,000 in cash, for a house that neighborhood comparables suggested was worth only $600,000. Why would anyone pay $250,000 over market value for a modest property in what Jessica had repeatedly described as a declining area? But then I remembered who I was beneath all the grief and confusion and self-doubt. Margaret Chen, professional librarian for 40 years, expert researcher, trained skeptic, woman who had built a career on asking the right questions and finding reliable answers. If something seems too good to be true, there's always a reason, and that reason usually involves someone else's profit. The next morning brought my first real surprise since moving to the house. Mrs. Rosa Gutierrez, a woman in her 70s with silver-streaked hair and warm brown eyes, knocked on my door carrying a steaming casserola and wearing the kind of genuine smile that had become completely foreign to me over the past several years. Mijo Henry helped my grandson Miguel with math homework every Tuesday for 2 years. She told me in carefully practiced English, her slight accent making every word sound like a gift. "Did you know your husband spoke perfect Spanish? He never mentioned it to you." I didn't know. In 50 years of marriage, through all our conversations about work and family and dreams and fears, Henry had never mentioned speaking Spanish fluently, never told me about tutoring Miguel, never shared this entire community life he'd apparently built while I focused obsessively on work and family obligations and maintaining the perfect middle-class lifestyle I thought we both wanted. Tommy Nguyen, The 17-year-old from the house next door appeared at my front door later that afternoon. He was tall and lanky, with an eager expression and the kind of nervous energy that reminded me of my best library students from years past. "Mr. Chen said you were a professional librarian for a really long time," he said with shy politeness. "My parents work 2 jobs each and don't speak much English yet. Could you maybe help me with my college applications? I'm trying to get into Stanford or Berkeley for computer science, but the essays are really hard." As the days passed slowly, I discovered that Henry had been genuinely beloved in this neighborhood, that Jessica had dismissed as dangerous and worthless. He'd repaired Rose's fence after the big storm last winter, helped the Patels navigate their complicated tax returns, taught Tommy's little sister Maria to ride her bicycle in our driveway. The community I'd been exiled to showed me more authentic love and concern in 2 weeks than my biological family had demonstrated in 2 years. But questions gnawed at me persistently, like hunger that couldn't be satisfied. Why would a complete stranger offer so much money for this modest house? Why had Henry always deflected my casual questions about this property's history and potential value? And why did Kevin Park know so many specific details about our house's electrical system and structural improvements, when he claimed to have never been inside 2 weeks after my exile began? Kevin Park returned with renewed urgency. This time, he arrived in a pristine Tesla Model S, dressed in the kind of expensive casual clothing that screamed Silicon Valley success, $1,000 sneakers, perfectly distressed jeans, a sweater that probably cost more than most people's rent. "Mrs. Chen," he said, flashing a practiced smile that never quite reached his calculating eyes, "I sincerely hope you've had adequate time to consider my generous offer. I represent several investment groups that specialize in helping families transition from traditional to more modern living situations." Something about his phrasing made my skin crawl with instinctive warning. "What exactly do you mean by transitioning families?" "Well, let's be completely honest about this neighborhood's trajectory," he said, gesturing vaguely at the modest homes surrounding us with obvious disdain. "Current market indicators strongly suggest an imminent correction downward. I'd hate to see someone like you caught in a declining market when you could secure your financial future today with this opportunity." Kevin Park was skillfully manipulative. I had to admit, professional without being overtly pushy, concerned without seeming desperate, urgent without appearing threatening. But 40 years of dealing with manipulative parents trying to challenge their children's grades, demanding special treatment, or attempting to intimidate librarians into bending rules had taught me to recognize emotional manipulation tactics from considerable distance. "I appreciate your concern for my financial well-being," I said carefully, watching his face for tells. "But I'll need more time to evaluate all my options thoroughly." "Of course. Absolutely understandable," he replied with practiced patience. "But Mrs. Chen, I must emphasize that this particular offer expires Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp. After that point, market conditions could change rapidly, and I won't be able to guarantee the same terms." After he left, speeding away in his silent electric car, like he was late for something more important, I did what any competent librarian would do when faced with suspicious information. I conducted thorough, systematic research. Online property records revealed a disturbing pattern that made my professional instincts scream warnings. 3 families on my immediate block had sold their homes recently, all for prices significantly above current market valuations. All sales had been completed by different limited liability companies with deliberately nondescriptive names designed to obscure their true ownership: Bay Area Holdings, Peninsula Investments, Golden State Properties, Silicon Solutions LLC. None of these companies maintained functional websites, clear business purposes, or any digital footprint that I could identify through standard search methods. Tommy's father, who worked as a software engineer at a mid-level tech company, confirmed my growing suspicions when I mentioned the unusual real estate activity during one of our conversations over coffee. "Something major is definitely coming to San Jose," he told me quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "But everyone who knows specific details has signed strict non-disclosure agreements. Nobody talks openly about timeline or scope." Rosa had noticed the disturbing pattern, too. "Developers have been circling around here like vultures for months," she informed me during one of our morning conversations on her front porch. "Always cash offers, always pressure to sell immediately, always promises that the opportunity won't last much longer." When I called David seeking advice about Kevin Park's offer, I reached his voicemail again. His eventual text response was typically dismissive and rushed. "Sounds like a good deal, Mom. Real estate market's incredibly hot right now. I'd take the money and run before things change." But every instinct I developed as a professional researcher was screaming urgent warnings. If Kevin Park wanted my house desperately enough to pay $250,000 over market value, there had to be a compelling reason that he wasn't sharing. And if there was a hidden reason driving his generous offer, I was absolutely going to discover what it was. No matter how long the investigation took, the game was just beginning, and I was finally ready to play. The breakthrough that changed everything came during my third week of methodically cleaning Henry's workshop in the garage. Behind a stack of old paint cans that hadn't been moved in years, I discovered a locked metal file cabinet that I'd somehow never noticed during all our years living in this house. The key was on Henry's keychain, which I'd been carrying in my purse but hadn't had the emotional strength to examine closely until that moment. Inside were documents that fundamentally altered my understanding of everything I thought I knew about my husband, my property, and my family's financial situation. Love letters from our early marriage that I'd never seen before. "When the inevitable tech boom reaches San Jose, Maggie, we'll be ready for whatever opportunities or challenges come our way." Corporate correspondence dating back to 1975 IBM formally requesting to purchase our land for a satellite research facility with an offer of $50,000, a fortune at that time. Intel making detailed inquiries in 1992 about future development opportunities in the South Bay corridor with preliminary valuations that made my head spin. Oracle, Apple, Google, Microsoft all had approached Henry repeatedly over the decades with increasingly substantial offers for our modest property. Each letter was more urgent than the last, each proposal more generous, each corporate representative more insistent about the limited time nature of their interest, and Henry had politely declined every single approach without ever mentioning these opportunities to me. His handwritten research notes, filed meticulously in manila folders, revealed a sophisticated understanding of Silicon Valley's expansion patterns that I'd never suspected he possessed. They always come back, generation after generation. He'd written in his careful script. The land remembers what they need, even when they don't fully realize it yet. Patience is the key. Never sell when they're desperate. Only when the terms serve our community. He'd been tracking technology industry growth patterns for 40 years, watching as development moved outward from Stanford and Palo Alto like ripples in a pond, always pushing south and east, always reaching eventually toward our little corner of San Jose. His maps showed projected expansion routes, infrastructure needs, population growth patterns, and corporate real estate strategies with the precision of a professional urban planner. The most devastating discovery was Henry's final journal entry, dated just 3 weeks before his death. "The diagnosis is progressing faster than Dr. Martinez expected. I forget critical details now, names, dates, important commitments that once seemed permanently etched in my memory. But I cannot forget this fundamental truth. Maggie deserves to choose her own future freely. Not Jessica with her manipulative schemes, not David with his corporate thinking, not some faceless corporation with its algorithms and profit margins. Maggie must decide for herself, when she's ready, with full knowledge of all the options. Henry had been protecting me from decades of corporate pressure, while simultaneously battling early-stage dementia that he'd hidden from everyone, including me. He'd carried this enormous burden completely alone, terrified that in his growing confusion he might accidentally sign away my financial security or make commitments he couldn't remember making. I spent the next 2 days applying every research methodology I'd learned during 40 years of professional library work to internet investigation. I cross-referenced property records with corporate filing databases, tracked ownership patterns through layers of shell companies and legal entities, analyzed zoning changes and infrastructure development timelines with the systematic thoroughness that had made me an excellent librarian. What I uncovered was a sophisticated, decades-long land acquisition program that was far more extensive than I'd initially imagined. Technology companies would purchase properties through different limited liability companies to avoid driving up neighborhood prices through obvious corporate interest, then hold the land dormant until major development plans were publicly announced and property values skyrocketed. When I called David to share my discoveries, his response was pure Silicon Valley arrogance, wrapped in condescending concern. "Mom, please don't fall into conspiracy theory thinking. That's genuinely not healthy for seniors who are dealing with grief and major life transitions. These companies have incredibly advanced algorithms and comprehensive market analysis. If there was genuine value in your property, it would already be accurately reflected in current pricing models." But I wasn't some confused elderly woman seeing imaginary patterns in random data. I was a professionally trained researcher with 4 decades of experience, uncovering a very real, very profitable corporate strategy that had been operating systematically under my nose for years. Jessica arrived unannounced on a Thursday morning, bringing what she pompously introduced as a senior financial advisor, a man in an expensive suit who spoke in patronizing tones about age-related cognitive decline and its documented impact on complex financial decision-making capacity. The moment I saw Jessica's carefully orchestrated presentation, I was transported back to my own childhood in Los Angeles' Chinatown. When I was 12 years old, I watched my parents serve customers in our struggling laundromat, saw the shame in their eyes when wealthier Chinese families looked down on us for working in what they considered a degrading service industry. I changed my name from Jinghua to Jessica in high school, desperate to erase anything that marked me as different, poor, or insufficiently American. Meeting David in college had been my salvation. His family represented the stable, respectable middle-class life I'd dreamed about since childhood. His mother, Margaret, had always been kind to me, but I'd never felt secure enough to trust that kindness completely. That old fear of sliding backward, of being poor and powerless again, still drove every major decision I made, every strategic move in my carefully constructed adult life. "We're genuinely concerned about your judgment capabilities since Henry's death," Jessica said with false sweetness, spreading official-looking documents across my kitchen table like a prosecuting attorney presenting evidence of criminal behavior. She'd prepared an elaborate PowerPoint presentation on her laptop, optimizing Margaret's transition to appropriate senior living solutions. Slide after slide detailed supposed reasons why I was incompetent to manage my own affairs. Market volatility graphs showing real estate price fluctuations, maintenance cost projections for aging properties, social isolation statistics for elderly widows living alone, criminal activity reports for East San Jose zip codes. The presentation was thorough, professional, and completely designed to make me doubt my own mental capabilities and emotional stability. But I'd spent days preparing for this confrontation too. "Jessica," I said with calm authority, pulling out my own printed research analysis that I'd organized into a professional binder. "I may be grieving my husband's death, but I'm certainly not senile or mentally incompetent. Before we discuss my future living arrangements, I'd like to understand why you're so urgently eager for me to sell this house immediately." Her carefully maintained corporate facade cracked slightly around the edges. "We're simply trying to help you optimize this obviously difficult situation for everyone's benefit." Optimize. Such a quintessentially Silicon Valley word. Everything in their world had to be optimized, streamlined, made more efficient, including disposing of inconvenient family members who didn't fit their algorithms for maximum productivity and profit. At that precise moment, as if summoned by divine intervention, Tommy knocked on my door with news that would change absolutely everything. He'd been researching city planning websites for a high school government project about urban development and discovered something extraordinary called the North San Jose Transit Enhancement Project. $3.8 billion in infrastructure improvements scheduled over 30 months. Light rail extension connecting East San Jose directly to major tech campuses in Cupertino, Mountain View, and Palo Alto, road improvements, utility upgrades, fiber optic installations, new bus rapid transit lines. The project would transform this neighborhood from an isolated, working-class area into a 15-minute commute to every major technology campus in Silicon Valley. According to the detailed city planning documents, my house sat in the exact geographic center of the designated development zone. Jessica's face went completely white when she saw the official city planning documents spread across my kitchen table. Her financial advisor suddenly remembered an urgent appointment elsewhere and practically fled through my front door. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt like I was the person in complete control of the conversation. "You knew about this infrastructure project," I said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of absolute certainty. "Maggie, let's please be reasonable about this complicated situation. You've known about this $3.8 billion development plan for months, and you've been systematically trying to manipulate me into selling before I could discover the truth about what my property will actually be worth." She stood up abruptly, her carefully maintained corporate composure finally shattering completely. "You don't understand how modern real estate markets actually function. You're being completely selfish and unrealistic. We're trying to help you optimize this situation for everyone's benefit." "Whose benefit exactly?" I asked quietly. "Mine or yours?" Jessica's mask slipped entirely, revealing the desperate insecurity underneath all her professional success. "You think you're so smart with your library research, but you don't understand anything about real business or market dynamics. You're just a retired librarian who doesn't know how the world actually works." "I know enough to recognize manipulation when I see it," I replied, "and I know enough to ask why my own family would lie to me about something this important." After she left, slamming my front door hard enough to rattle the windows, I sat alone in my kitchen with the city planning documents spread across the table like a treasure map pointing toward an unexpected future. According to the official municipal projections, my current $600,000 house would be worth approximately $4.2 million within 30 months of the transit project's completion. For the first time since Henry's funeral, I actually smiled with genuine happiness and anticipation. The discovery of David's betrayal came at his company's monthly happy hour, an event he'd casually invited me to several months earlier and then completely forgotten about. I almost decided not to attend, but something told me I needed to understand his professional world better if I was going to comprehend how my own son had become such a stranger to me. The Meta offices in Menlo Park were exactly what I'd expected from years of news coverage: cavernous open spaces designed to encourage collaboration, ping-pong tables and meditation rooms, free gourmet food stations, employees who looked young enough to be my grandchildren. David seemed genuinely surprised and pleased to see me, introducing me around to his colleagues with apparent pride. "This is my mother, Margaret," he announced repeatedly to various groups. "The one I've mentioned who's dealing with the East San Jose property transition situation." Property transition situation. That's how my entire life had been reduced in his mind, a technical problem requiring algorithmic solutions and data-driven optimization. It was during a routine team presentation that I overheard the conversation that revealed the devastating truth about my son's involvement in Jessica's scheme. David was presenting to his colleagues about something called Neighborhood Connect Housing Initiative, Meta's ambitious plan to provide affordable housing options for their rapidly expanding workforce throughout the Bay Area. East San Jose represents a unique strategic opportunity for community-integrated development, he explained confidently, clicking through slides filled with demographic data, transit accessibility scores, and projected property value increases. We have direct local community knowledge through established family connections that provides us invaluable insight into neighborhood transition patterns and resident sentiment analysis. One slide showed a detailed map of my neighborhood, with individual properties marked in different colors based on acquisition status and development potential. My house was highlighted in bright yellow with the notation, "Strategic Acquisition Target Family Consultation Currently in Progress." The next slide contained financial projections showing expected property value increases following infrastructure improvements, with my address specifically listed as a key parcel in Meta's expansion strategy. When his presentation concluded, I cornered David in the hallway outside the conference room, my heart pounding with anger and betrayal. "Family consultation?" I asked quietly, struggling to keep my voice under control. His face immediately flushed deep red with embarrassment and guilt. "Mom, I didn't realize you were actually here. I mean, that's just standard corporate language for, you've been providing your company with inside information about my property and my personal situation. It's not like that at all," he said desperately. "Jessica just said that helping you understand market realities would be best for everyone involved in this complicated situation. She wanted me to analyze the neighborhood dynamics so we could give you proper guidance based on actual data rather than emotional decision-making." What market dynamics? David, what neighborhood analysis? What kind of guidance were you planning to give me? The complete truth came spilling out like water from a broken dam, each revelation more devastating than the last. Jessica had connected Kevin Park to me through her extensive Tesla real estate network, leveraging professional relationships she'd built during her years in the industry. She'd arranged for them to split a substantial consulting fee of $150,000 for successfully facilitating my property sale to corporate interests. David had been using his Meta security clearance to track my property through internal company databases, analyzing neighborhood transition patterns, providing detailed demographic reports to Jessica's real estate contacts, and sharing proprietary market intelligence that wasn't available to the general public. "When exactly did helping your mother become a business opportunity?" I asked, each word carefully controlled despite the rage building in my chest. David couldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at his expensive sneakers like a guilty child. "I honestly didn't think about it that way initially." Jessica explained that the market situation was getting incredibly complicated, and she said you needed professional guidance to make the right decisions for your financial security. Jessica explained. Jessica arranged. I felt 50 years of accumulated maternal patience finally reach its absolute breaking point. "When did you stop thinking independently and start letting your wife make all your moral decisions for you?" "Mom, please try to understand the pressure I'm under at work," he said desperately. "The housing market competition, the performance metrics, the corporate advancement requirements. Everyone uses family connections for professional advantage. It's just how business works in Silicon Valley. I understand perfectly that I raised you to protect your family, not to profit from their misfortune," I said with quiet intensity. "I understand that I worked 2 jobs to pay for your education so you could have opportunities I never had. I understand that I sacrificed my own dreams so you could achieve yours. What I don't understand is how that sacrifice turned you into someone who would manipulate his own mother for money." The drive home from Menlo Park passed in a blur of tears and shattered illusions. Every exit sign, every familiar landmark seemed to mock me with memories of the son I thought I'd raised versus the stranger he'd become under Jessica's influence. That evening, I called the real estate attorney Patricia Wells, whom Rosa had enthusiastically recommended based on her reputation for defending homeowners against corporate acquisition pressure. Patricia specialized in exactly these situations, and she delivered news that made my head spin with possibility and rage in equal measure. Mrs. Chen, based on the infrastructure timeline and the documented corporate interest you've described, I would conservatively estimate your property will be worth between $4 and $5 million within 24 to 30 months, she said with professional calm, but only if you can successfully resist the pressure to sell immediately at below-market rates. $4 to $5 million, more money than Henry and I had earned during our entire 40-year marriage combined. Money that my own family had been systematically planning to steal from me through manipulation, lies, and emotional abuse. What should I do? I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of both the opportunity and the betrayal. You fight back intelligently and strategically, Patricia said with quiet confidence that reminded me of my own professional demeanor during difficult library board meetings. And I know exactly how we're going to do it. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my grief over Henry's death had been transformed into something else entirely. Determination to reclaim my power and ensure that his sacrifice in protecting me wouldn't be wasted on family members who saw love as just another asset to be optimized for maximum profit. The investigation was complete. Now it was time to take action. Rosa Gutierrez turned out to be much more than just a kind neighbor with a warm smile and homemade casseroles. She was a seasoned community organizer with 40 years of hard-won experience fighting displacement and gentrification throughout the rapidly changing landscape of San Jose. When I shared my discoveries about the infrastructure project and corporate land acquisition strategy with her, she wasn't surprised in the least. "Mija, this is exactly how the system always works," she explained, her weathered hands gesturing emphatically as we sat in her small but immaculate kitchen. They buy up neighborhood properties piece by piece through secret shell companies, then announce their big development plans when it's too late for the rest of us to organize or benefit. But this time, we had something that communities usually lacked: advance warning and the precious opportunity to change the predictable outcome. Rosa immediately sprang into action, organizing weekly community meetings at the Vietnamese restaurant on Jackson Street. The owner, Mrs. Fain, donated the back room and kept the coffee flowing as neighbors shared crucial information about unusual cash offers, strange visitors asking probing questions, and increasing pressure tactics from various real estate investors and corporate representatives. Together, we methodically mapped out which properties had already been acquired by the mysterious LLCs and identified the unmistakable pattern companies were systematically trying to control the entire transit corridor before any public announcements were made about the infrastructure project. It was a sophisticated strategy that had probably been in development for years. Tommy Nguyen became our volunteer technology coordinator, enthusiastically helping older residents navigate the complicated maze of city planning websites and property record databases that contained crucial information about our neighborhood's future. The 17-year-old was genuinely brilliant with computers, and his college applications to Stanford and Berkeley were actually becoming stronger because of the advanced research and analytical skills he was developing through our grassroots collaboration. "You know," I told him one evening as we sat at my kitchen table reviewing dense corporate filing documents together, "you can absolutely succeed in the technology industry without forgetting where you came from or abandoning the people who supported you along the way." He grinned with the kind of youthful optimism that made me remember why I'd become a teacher in the first place. "Is that what you're doing, Mrs. Chen, succeeding without forgetting your roots?" Perhaps I was learning to do exactly that, though I'd never quite thought about it in those terms before. Patricia Wells systematically introduced me to the intricate world of corporate real estate negotiations with surgical precision and remarkable patience. She taught me to speak their language fluently: market capitalization, development timelines, community impact assessments, environmental review processes, zoning variances, and municipal approval procedures. More importantly, she educated me thoroughly about my rights as a property owner and the substantial legal protections available against coercive acquisition tactics. The fundamental key to success in this situation, she explained during one of our intensive strategy sessions in her downtown office, is maintaining absolute control over the entire process from beginning to end. Never allow them to set the timeline, dictate the terms, or establish the rules of engagement. You possess something they desperately want, make them compete properly and transparently for the privilege of acquiring it. I invested in a professional wardrobe that made me feel confident and authoritative, and I practiced assertive body language in front of my bedroom mirror until it felt natural, slowly but steadily. I felt myself transforming from a passive victim of circumstance into a legitimate player in a complex game I was finally beginning to understand and master. The corporate meetings began in earnest during the month of May. Apple's real estate team was impressively professional and respectful, treating me like the sophisticated property owner I was becoming, rather than the confused, grieving widow they'd probably expected to encounter based on their previous experiences with elderly homeowners. "Mrs. Chen, we genuinely appreciate your thoughtful and methodical approach to this challenging situation," said Jennifer Walsh, Apple's Director of Community Development, a sharp woman in her 40s, who spoke with the kind of authority that came from years of complex negotiations. "We're absolutely prepared to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement that serves everyone's legitimate interests." Their initial proposal was substantial $8 million for the property, plus an additional $600,000 community development fund specifically designated to improve local schools and neighborhood infrastructure. The timeline was reasonable, a 6-month closing process with comprehensive relocation assistance if I chose to move elsewhere. Google's negotiating team was equally impressive, led by Marcus Rodriguez, a genuinely warm man who'd actually grown up in East San Jose before earning his MBA from Stanford and returning to help his old neighborhood. Their competitive bid reflected both business acumen and personal connection, $4.1 million, plus extensive job training programs with guaranteed local hiring preferences for all construction and service positions created by their development project. "This neighborhood gave me everything I needed to succeed," Marcus told me earnestly during our private meeting. "Now I want to make sure that success flows back to the families who are still here." Meta's approach was purely financial and notably impersonal. $4.0 million cash with no community strings attached whatsoever. David wasn't included in their negotiating team, a small mercy that spared us both the additional emotional complications that would have inevitably arisen from that conflict of interest. But despite the substantial offers and professional presentations, I wasn't ready to accept any proposal yet. Patricia had taught me the considerable value of patience in high-stakes negotiations, and I was discovering that I genuinely enjoyed the unfamiliar power that came with possessing something that multiple billion-dollar corporations desperately wanted. For the first time in my adult life, I was the person everyone else needed to impress. The auction strategy was Patricia's brilliant masterstroke, a plan that demonstrated both legal sophistication and tactical genius. Instead of negotiating separately with each company in private meetings that could easily become manipulative, we would organize a controlled bidding environment with complete transparency and extensive media coverage. This approach provides you maximum legal protection against any accusations of favoritism or corruption, she explained carefully during our planning session, and it ensures optimal value realization for your property. Additionally, the publicity pressure means they'll be forced to submit their genuine best offers immediately instead of attempting to manipulate you with low-ball initial proposals. The story spread rapidly through technology blogs and local media outlets like Wildfire, Grandmother Takes on Big Tech and David vs. Goliath Property Battle. Suddenly, I was fielding interview requests from reporters across the Bay Area and becoming the unexpected public face of responsible corporate expansion practices. The formal bidding event was scheduled for Thursday morning at San Jose City Hall, a venue chosen deliberately for its symbolic significance. 3 companies, 1 final round of sealed offers. Winner takes everything. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone involved. This represented democracy in action. A senior citizen holding Silicon Valley's most powerful corporations accountable for their impact on existing communities. David requested a private coffee meeting the night before the auction, and I could see the nervousness in his eyes as we sat across from each other at the small cafe near his apartment. "Mom, I need to tell you something important about Meta's participation tomorrow," he said, his voice tight with emotion. I waited silently, giving him space to find his words. "I convinced them to withdraw their bid entirely." This genuinely surprised me. "Why would you do that? Won't there be professional consequences?" "Because what Jessica and I attempted to do was fundamentally wrong," he said, meeting my eyes directly for the first time in months. "Using you for career advancement opportunities, treating your home and your future like some corporate profit center that we could manipulate for our own benefit." He stared into his coffee cup with obvious shame. "I've been attending therapy sessions twice a week, learning about healthy boundaries, about the crucial difference between supporting someone you love and manipulating them for personal gain." "What will this decision cost you professionally?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Probably quite a lot," he admitted. "Management isn't happy about losing access to what they called invaluable local community insights and strategic intelligence. There's talk about reassigning me to less important projects, maybe even performance improvement plans. But honestly, Mom, I'd rather face unemployment than continue being the person I was becoming under Jessica's influence." For the first time in many months, I recognized my actual son instead of the corporate puppet Jessica had been manipulating. "I'm genuinely proud of you, David," I said, and meant every word completely. It takes real courage to sacrifice career advancement for moral principles. As we walked to our cars, David turned to me with a question that had obviously been weighing on his mind. "Mom, do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me for what I did, for betraying your trust like that?" I considered his question carefully before answering. Forgiveness isn't something that happens overnight, especially when the betrayal involved family. But watching you make difficult choices to become a better person, that's the kind of action that makes forgiveness possible. San Jose City Hall had never witnessed anything quite like this extraordinary spectacle. Corporate lawyers in expensive suits mingled uncomfortably with local residents, carrying colorful homemade signs, while reporters circulated throughout the crowd with cameras and notebooks, documenting every interaction for their stories about grassroots activism challenging corporate power. Rosa had organized an impressive showing of community supporters who brought tamales, coffee, and an infectious energy that transformed what could have been an intimidating corporate proceeding into something that felt like a neighborhood celebration. Children played in the corridors while their parents discussed the potential implications of different development scenarios. The bidding process was deliberately straightforward and transparent, sealed final offers, opened simultaneously in front of witnesses, with formal presentations from each company detailing their specific community commitment plans and long-term development vision. Google presented first, with Marcus Rodriguez delivering a presentation that was both professionally polished and deeply personal. He spoke with genuine passion about growing up in East San Jose, about corporate responsibility to the communities that enabled and supported technology industry growth, about the moral obligation successful companies had to give back to the neighborhoods that had nurtured their employees. "This isn't just about acquiring property," he explained to the assembled crowd. "This is about proving that economic development can strengthen communities instead of destroying them." Their final offer reflected both financial competitiveness and community commitment, $4.1 million for the property, plus $800,000 in comprehensive job training programs with guaranteed local hiring commitments for all positions created by their development project. Apple's Jennifer Walsh followed with a presentation that focused on sustainable development principles and long-term community partnership models. She outlined their company's evolving philosophy about corporate citizenship and their recognition that technology companies had a responsibility to address the housing crisis they'd helped create through rapid expansion. "We're not just building another corporate campus," she said, gesturing to detailed architectural plans displayed on large screens. "We're investing in a community partnership that will benefit residents for generations to come." Their bid was slightly higher financially, but included something even more valuable, $4.2 million for the property, plus $1 million designated specifically for affordable housing preservation throughout the surrounding neighborhood, ensuring that longtime residents wouldn't be displaced by the development process. Meta had withdrawn as David had promised, leaving only two serious contenders competing for my property and the right to shape our neighborhood's future. The decision ultimately wasn't just about money. It was fundamentally about values and long-term community impact. Apple's commitment to affordable housing preservation meant that the families I'd grown to care about wouldn't be forced out by the development I was helping to enable. Their offer wasn't simply purchasing my property, it was investing in the entire community's sustainable future. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes watching my every movement. The room fell completely silent as I prepared to speak. "After careful consideration of both proposals," I announced clearly, my voice carrying to every corner of the packed room, "I accept Apple's proposal." The applause from community supporters was absolutely deafening, echoing off the walls of the government building like thunder. Reporters rushed forward with urgent questions about my decision-making process and what this meant for similar situations throughout Silicon Valley. Rosa hugged me so tightly I thought she might crack my ribs, tears of joy streaming down her weathered cheeks. But the real victory wasn't the financial success or the media attention. It was definitively proving that corporations could engage with existing communities ethically and respectfully, that development didn't automatically require displacement and gentrification, that an elderly immigrant woman could sit confidently at the negotiating table as an equal partner in determining Silicon Valley's future direction. Jennifer Walsh approached me immediately after the announcement, her professional composure barely containing her obvious excitement about the successful conclusion of months of negotiations. "Mrs. Chen, this has been an extraordinary process," she said, shaking my hand with genuine warmth. "Your approach has already influenced how our company thinks about community engagement. We'd like to discuss the possibility of consulting arrangements for future projects." As I looked around the room at the celebration unfolding around me, neighbors embracing, children laughing, reporters interviewing community members about their hopes for the neighborhood's future, I realized that something fundamental had shifted not just in my personal circumstances, but in my understanding of what was possible when people refused to accept powerlessness as inevitable. Tommy Nguyen pushed through the crowd to reach me, his face glowing with the kind of excitement that only teenagers could generate. "Mrs. Chen, this is incredible. You actually did it. You beat Silicon Valley at their own game." I smiled at his enthusiasm, but I knew the truth was more nuanced. I didn't beat anyone, Tommy. I just insisted that everyone involved could win if we structured the agreement properly. As the crowd began to disperse and reporters conducted final interviews, I felt a profound sense of completion settling over me. Not the ending of a story, but the successful conclusion of one chapter and the beginning of something entirely new and potentially even more meaningful. Patricia Wells appeared at my elbow with a thick folder of documents that would need to be signed over the coming weeks. "Well, Margaret," she said with a satisfied smile, "I think we can safely say that went exactly according to plan." But as I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, people who had become family over these intense months of collaboration and mutual support, I realized that the plan had actually exceeded our wildest expectations. We hadn't just secured a good deal for one property. We'd created a new model for how corporate expansion could happen ethically, how communities could organize effectively to protect their interests, how individual citizens could hold powerful institutions accountable through preparation, persistence, and strategic thinking. The revolution hadn't been televised, but it had definitely been documented by every major news outlet in the Bay Area. 6 months later, I was living comfortably in a beautiful home in Los Altos Hills, $2.3 million, but worth every penny for the spacious guest rooms where David and the grandchildren could visit regularly. The money had purchased security and independence, but more importantly, it had bought me genuine respect and meaningful autonomy. The Chen Family Foundation launched with a $500,000 endowment focused specifically on educational initiatives in underserved communities throughout the Bay Area. Tommy Nguyen became our first scholarship recipient, heading to Stanford in the fall with a full academic scholarship plus guaranteed summer internship opportunities at participating technology companies. David had indeed left Meta, but not for unemployment as he'd feared. He joined a nonprofit organization dedicated to ethical technology education, accepting a significant salary reduction, but gaining something infinitely more valuable, the ability to look at himself in the mirror each morning without shame. Jessica's exit from our family was less dramatic than her manipulation had been, but far more permanent. The divorce proceedings were predictably ugly. She demanded her rightful share of profits that had never existed, based on schemes that had never succeeded. When Tesla announced significant layoffs and her stock options became worthless, she accepted a position with Amazon in Seattle. Geographic distance, it seemed, was the only way she could maintain her illusions about her own importance. The real transformation was visible throughout the community. Apple's development fund had been used exactly as promised: new technology laboratories for local schools, upgraded infrastructure throughout the neighborhood, job training programs with genuine opportunities for economic advancement. Property values rose steadily throughout the area, but longtime residents benefited through equity appreciation rather than facing displacement. Rosa won election to the city council on a platform of community-centered development policies. She credited our collaboration for demonstrating that fighting corporate power didn't always mean saying no. Sometimes it meant demanding significantly better terms and genuine community benefits. At the Community Center's Technology Literacy Program for seniors, I met Robert Kim. He was 68 years old, a retired Apple engineer who'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier. We bonded initially over our shared experience of profound grief and our mutual commitment to using technology to serve communities rather than exploit them. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on genuine mutual respect and shared values rather than loneliness or convenience. Robert understood the unique complexities of Korean American family dynamics, just as I understood the particular challenges of Chinese American identity formation. We both knew intimately what it meant to bridge different cultures successfully, to achieve professional success in America while maintaining meaningful connections to our cultural heritage. The grandchildren absolutely loved Grandpa Robert, especially when he helped them with coding projects or patiently explained how computers and algorithms actually functioned. David enthusiastically approved of our relationship, respecting Robert's well-established reputation for ethical business practices throughout his 30-year Apple career. When Rosa organized a neighborhood block party, specifically to introduce Robert to our extended community, I realized I'd discovered something I'd never experienced before: a genuine partnership with someone who saw me as an equal rather than a dependent. 18 months after the property sale, I faced another choice that would fundamentally define my future direction. Harvard Business School invited me to deliver guest lectures on ethical corporate community engagement. 60 minutes. Producers wanted to profile my story for a segment on grassroots activism. Several publishers were offering substantial book deals for my memoir. But the most significant opportunity came directly from Apple, a consulting position leading community relations for their expansion projects throughout California and beyond. Mrs. Chen, Jennifer Walsh explained during our meeting. What you've accomplished here in East San Jose has literally become our company's model for responsible growth and community engagement. We'd like you to help other communities navigate similar situations successfully. Their offer was extremely generous, $200,000 annually, plus equity participation in successful development projects. It would ensure my financial comfort for life while providing me meaningful influence over how Silicon Valley expanded into new communities. But Patricia Wells suggested a potentially superior alternative, independent consulting, that would allow me to work with multiple corporations while maintaining complete advocacy independence. You'd have significantly higher impact on actual outcomes, she argued persuasively, and you'd avoid any appearance of being purchased by a single company's interests. I chose independence without hesitation. Chen Community Development opened for business 6 months later with consulting contracts to advise Google, Apple, Meta, and 3 smaller technology companies on community engagement strategies. My first major project involved helping a family in Oakland navigate a remarkably similar acquisition situation. My success rate remained perfect in every case. Both the corporation and the existing community achieved better outcomes than they would have reached through traditional adversarial negotiations. The East San Jose Community Center expansion was completed in December, featuring the Henry Chen Memorial Library as its impressive centerpiece. At the dedication ceremony, over 200 people gathered to celebrate not just the beautiful new building, but the replicable model it represented, technology serving and strengthening communities rather than displacing them. I thought retirement meant becoming invisible to the world, I told the assembled crowd. Instead, I learned that experience and wisdom are Silicon Valley's most undervalued and underutilized resources. David stood proudly in the front row with his children, his face glowing with genuine pride. Robert held my hand supportively as I spoke about Henry's vision of a future where economic growth lifted everyone in the community rather than leaving vulnerable people behind. Rosa introduced me to the crowd as the woman who taught Silicon Valley to say please and thank you. But I understood the truth was far more complex. I hadn't fundamentally changed the technology industry through force. I'd simply insisted that it live up to its own publicly stated values of innovation and social progress. The final image I carried from that celebratory day was of the multi-generational coding class meeting in the new computer laboratory. Elderly Vietnamese immigrants learning alongside recent Stanford graduates, children teaching their grandparents to navigate tablet computers, while teenagers patiently explained machine learning algorithms to curious senior citizens. This was my real legacy, not the money or media recognition, but definitive proof that technology could bring diverse communities together rather than tear them apart. That wisdom and life experience retained genuine value in a youth-obsessed industry. That an elderly immigrant woman could sit confidently at the decision-making table as an equal partner in designing America's technological future. As I watched Tommy Nguyen, now a sophomore at Stanford, studying computer science, explaining artificial intelligence concepts to Rosa's 80-year-old neighbor, I understood what Henry had meant in his final journal entry. I'd finally chosen my own future, and in doing so, I'd helped others choose theirs too. The American dream hadn't died in Silicon Valley. It had simply learned to speak Mandarin and Spanish and Vietnamese, to respect both tradition and innovation simultaneously, to understand that true wealth came from lifting entire communities rather than abandoning them for personal advancement. At 73 years old, with Robert's hand warm in mine, and my grandchildren's laughter echoing through the community center Henry had unknowingly made possible, I realized something profound. I wasn't ending my story in this place. I was just beginning the most important chapter of my life.